What is your name, what are your pronouns, and what are you going to talk about today?
So I'm Lee Fallon and my pronouns are he, him, and today I'm here to talk about being an adoptive parent.
Could you please give us an Adoption 101?
So a real quick Adoption 101. Adoption is a 3-phase process. Phase 1, you have a check-in with a social worker, they get a feel for you and your motivations for adoption, and if they like you and everything looks good, you move through into Phase 2. Through Phase 2, you get a full audit of your life. They will be asking you about your support network, your employment status, they'll do background checks on you, write a massive report, and then that will go to a panel which will make a decision. Can this couple or individual go through to Phase 3? For Phase 3, it's where you're going to find your child or children, and that's where you'll see profiles of children and decide whether or not you're interested in one of them. If you are, you'd progress, find out a lot more about those children, you might meet them, and then another report gets written about why you as an adopter or adopter couple are the right match for that child or children, and that goes to another panel to make a decision as to whether or not those kids will move in with you. After that, you'd transition those children from the foster carer to the adoptive parents, you'd settle in and then eventually be able to go to court to make that permanent. And you were free of social workers and those kids are legally your responsibility forevermore. And as you can imagine, I have gone through all 3 of those steps and through the court proceedings with my husband, and we are now the parents of 3 very beautiful children.
How has being an adoptive parent affected you personally?
It's life-changing, and actually I think on a whole the transition isn't that different between becoming a parent through birth as to becoming a parent through adoption, because ultimately at the end of the day you become a parent. So seeing the world different because you're thinking of your children and protecting your children, or rediscovering your world through your child's eyes. But it does have a few extra things that we need to consider. So you choose your child. That's different. You know, it's a magical conversation being able to talk to your son or daughter and say, we wanted you, we fought for you. And I think we also have to be completely open and honest about children that are available for adoption. The vast majority of children in our system have gone through a bad experience. So yes, you're becoming a parent, but you are becoming a parent of somebody who has had a rough start in life. So fundamentally you're a family, but there's also a likelihood with adoption that you will be taking in a child that has a lot of catching up to do developmentally, and they've got a lot of things they're going to need to talk through and work through with you.
Have you felt you've been marginalised or stereotyped due to being an adoptive parent?
I am a gay adoptive parent. You do get some stereotypes around adoption. People always assume that people are adopting because they've got fertility problems, because they're part of the LGBTQIA community. But actually, there's a whole raft of motivations why people want to adopt or foster. There are some people who choose to go down the adoption route because they know that there are so many children that need that loving home and they want to provide that for them. I guess it's fair to say that sometimes there are some damaging narratives around being a gay parent. I have to say we didn't experience any problem from any colleagues, from the university. It's been a really supportive environment for us. And importantly, the adoption agency, One Adoption, were absolutely fantastic. They were so incredibly helpful for the whole process. And they did ask us questions. So for example, we have a daughter. So they were asking quite legitimately, you know, are there female figures in your life, in your friendship group, in your community that she would be able to go to if she needs help and support? Even the school and the nurseries have been absolutely fantastic. So, for example, way before our children were placed with us, they started to buy books with LGBTQ families in them so that they could start seeing those kind of different family makeups in books before they were introduced to their new daddies, so that my children never feel left out and that they know that families look differently.
Could you do some myth busting about stereotypes surrounding being an adoptive parent?
I think if we're brutally honest, adoption's this wonderful end where you make a whole family. But actually, to make a new family, you've got to break a previous one. It's really, really hard when you've got at the back of your head that your happiness and success is based on fracturing somebody else's family. But that's why that system is so incredibly serious. That's why there are so many checks in place. Adoption is the last resort. So there's often a lot of trauma-informed parenting required. I guess another really big myth as well is around the level of support that you get. When you initially adopt those children, if there's anything medical, they'll get the exact same support as any child would through the NHS. And actually they get a kind of a bit of a priority bonus in some ways. So, for example, my children really struggled to get them a dentist, but because they were wards of the state at that point, there was an agreement in place with the local authority that there was one dentist that had to take them. Once you have adopted them, there is also after adoption support. So there's a phone number in my phone. And I guess, again, it comes back to just like any normal parental experience. You've got your friends and your family. For me, our relatives, particularly our neighbours, Auntie Lam and Auntie Caroline are on hand anytime my kids need anything, and it's a really important role model for my daughter as well. Okay, now the biggest myth, do I need to tell my children they're adopted? It is so incredibly important that we are open and honest with young people and children about their family makeup. So the advice of every adoption agency and local authority is to be open, honest and transparent about adoption. There is no way to keep that secret. It will come out. And it's about the well-being of that child. That child deserves to know where they came from. And it's kind of, for me, it's about not making a deal about it, so that it isn't seen as something that we've got to keep secret or something that's different. It's just a normal part, it's a thing that happens regularly. So having those conversations with the children all of the time so that they feel really secure and they know that, ultimately we've chosen them.
How could the people around you and the university do better or help you more?
I guess it's having that conversation. So how can we help you? Because actually those needs are going to be different for every single person, whether they're an individual adopter or they're adopting as a couple. I think the key thing is not to make any assumptions, because it's going to vary for everybody. The number one way to help initially is quite often to stay away. There will be some paternity and adoption leave quite often, and that's really safeguarded time to bond with the kids, and it's really important that no other family or friends are around. Those kids have to attach to you. And they might attach at different rates. I remember our youngest hooked onto my husband in 3 days. That level of attachment took months for him to build up with me, but that was okay. My elder children attached to me a little bit more than my husband originally. Again, it happens at different paces, so patience is really, really important. For the university, I had a really, really good time because I had a very open and honest dialogue with my line manager. I explained to them what I was going through and what I'd need. It's a lot, there was a lot of meetings to prepare. They weren't particularly aware of all of the meetings, so actually outlining that and having the discussion, how can we do this? We used the flexible working policy at the time to help me navigate all those meetings. And that's, I guess, one of the things I'm really excited about. I've been working with the ED&I team over the last year and with other colleagues to help produce a better version of our adoption policy, which is part of the wider family leave and benefits policy. And I'm fairly confident it's going to be something that's incredibly progressive, supportive, and potentially one of the best policies to support adoption out of any employer that I've seen. And that's exactly what our university should be doing as an anchor institution for our region and as an institution that is pushing social justice. And it already did. When I had that first conversation with my social worker, me and my husband were asked who you're employed by, what's your work? And the second I said I work for the University of Hull, my social worker said, fantastic, I've adopted loads of children who parents work at the university, and it's a really good employer.
How do you feel the media represents adoption?
There's a whole range of different representations, but I can tell you of a couple that have really stood out to me. The first is instant family. I mean, it's ultimately an instant family. I mean, that beautiful moment when they take the 3 kids home and they're like, what do we do? That they're ours now. And you go through that. I mean, I remember the first time me and my husband did bedtime and we sat downstairs and we barely dare make a sound for fear of waking them up. I'm like, they're our responsibility now, like, are we parents? Like, this is a thing. The second one that really speaks to me is called Trying. It is a wonderful series about a couple that are adopting, but the importance of, family and friends to help you through that is really, really important. I think the media's taken a lot more steps to positively represent adoption, and I think it's important to look past just television. The fact that I can go and buy a book that has 2 mums in it or 2 dads is so incredibly important, because my kids can see a family like theirs in books. I guess one of the final frontiers is probably kids' cartoons. Anytime you see that kind of representation, certain parties and politics and groups will always rally against that and talk about indoctrination. There's a very different feel from a book somebody's chosen to get from the library or chosen to buy a child versus something that might crop up on television. And there's a long way to go with that to see that broader representation. But that's not just to do with adoption, that's to do with everything. As I've said before, I'm not just a adoptive parent, I'm a married gay man who has adopted with somebody else, with my husband. So it's in all of those elements of representation, not just of adoption and of fostering, but of those diverse families as well.
Is there anything else you would like to say, or anything else you would like anyone to know about adoption?
Me and my husband, very early in our relationship, had always talked about wanting to have children, and ultimately, as a gay couple, you look at either surrogacy or you look at adoption. And for us, there was no way we were going to look at surrogacy when there were so many children in our immediate area who needed a family, and we knew we could provide that for them. So we went through that process. We attended an information session, worked Scared Away through phase 1 and phase 2. We made a decision that we wanted to adopt a sibling group. So we were approved to adopt 2 children aged 1 to 6. And you go through the matching process, and we went through some really difficult things where it's like, how do we make a decision on this information? Like, how do we say no? How do you turn down a child? But you do, you've got to find that right match. And eventually a profile landed, and it was 3 children, and we're like, no. Let's ask our social worker about this. The next thing we knew, everyone was in our house and we were talking about these kids, and their social worker loved us and we really liked them. And then we met their foster carer, and then a couple of weeks later we met them, and that was like all the feelings. I remember me and my husband stood in this park being like, what do we say, what do we do, and that was for a bump into meeting. We actually got a no the first time, and that was an issue of process. We don't need to go into the detail of it, but basically our social workers were from one authority, we were panelled in another, their processes were slightly different, and we had to go back and have another meeting, and everything was fine in the end. But that's a big hit as well, because it changed the date that we were looking at going on leave and everything. And then before I knew it, it was January and there were 3 kids moving in with us, and the roller coaster started. And it was exhausting, it was tiring, but it's kids, isn't it? And years later, we're now a family, and we have good days and bad days, but so does every family. I think one really important thing to reflect on, there's many times when I'm looking at my kids having a meltdown and I'm thinking, is it me? Have I done something wrong? Is it because you're adopted? Is it previous trauma? What's going on here? And you know what? Sometimes it is, but like 99% of the time it is because you're tired, you're hungry, you're thirsty. It's just those basics. about getting them right. And me and my husband have 3 beautiful children. We adopted them at the ages of 2, 3, 4, and we've not had a full night's sleep since, but we'd never change that for the world.